Okay. So last time, I'm done discussing what is moral agents or what are the moral agents. So supposedly, yun yung part ng ating discussion for our midterm. Kaso nga lang is hindi siya nakaabot and mostly dapat meron pa po ako ipapagawa activity sa inyo that time pero hindi na natuloy because of ECQ. So now, let us start discussing the second lesson that we will be tackling now in finals, which is feelings as feelings and moral decision making. So let us start my discussion by asking you, how are you today? O kumusta naman? What are you feeling today? Since it's now Thursday, ayan, or I think I am the last period. Ako yung last na period nyo. What do you feel today? Okay, yung iba sabi nila happy po, yung iba sabi nila is blessed, yes, happy, and sakto lang po. Many of us are happy, yung iba sabi happy daw sila, yan. I'm really happy din kayo. Ayan. Even though na yung sa situation nga natin. Still, we find the happiness through everyone. So with that, um, I know that every one of us feel differently, diba? Some of you may feel na sad for today. Some may also feel happy. And not all the time we feel the same feelings or emotions with each other. And in this lesson is we're going to talk about a how does emotions or feelings could help or could not help us in a moral decision making. So, feelings and moral decision making. So, yan. So, feelings as an instinctive response for a moral dilemma. So, when it comes to moral dilemmas, diba? There are some reasons why do we need to choose this type of action. And in deciding on what are the path that we are going to take is there is what do we call feelings. And dun sa feelings na yon, yun yung one of the reason why um, we are able to choose what do we think is the best for us. So feelings, some ethicists think that in ethics, it is a matter of emotions. And emotion matters in every aspect in ethics. So, yung mga ethicist class, sila yung nag-i-study ng different aspects or different concepts regarding ethics. So, moral judgment at their best should be emotional. So, yan din yung paniniwala ng mga ethicists. Na when it comes to moral judgment or yung mga highest moral judgment is we should use our emotions with that. So, it is necessary in the ethical judgment. So, emotions is always present or it should always be present in a ethical judgment. So, with that, it is said to be the judgment about the accomplishments of one goals. So one's feelings may be determined as part of a moral judgment. And it could also be part or it could also be a way on how are we going to succeed in accomplishing our different goals or solving our problems or solving a moral dilemma. So with that, um, we're going to tackle about how, or we will tackle how feelings as instinctive response to moral dilemma can be served as obstacle to make right decision. So sometimes, not all the time, and not all the time, feelings and human has an advantage. It at sometimes feelings can put us into disadvantages, 'di ba? And in this part, feelings is an instinctive response. When we say instinctive response, ito yung maaring first move natin or first thing na papasok sa atin when we are solving a moral dilemma. So, ethical judgment are highly emotional as people emotionally express their strong approval or disapproval in the different acts. So, syempre, as a person, as a human, we all have feelings and we all have the right to make ethical judgment using our feelings. But at some point, high ethical judgment or yung mga ethical judgment, mostly people use their emotions to express how they disapprove and how they approve that certain kind of acts. Like for example na lang, 'di ba, yung mga opinions when it comes to the internet. How are you going to handle those? O paano i-handle yung different issues na yon? So yan. Some people may disagree with other people's perspective and some people may disapprove into other people's perspective. So now, let's talk about naman feelings as an obstacle in making the right decision. So how does feelings could be an obstacle in making the right decision? So I will be introducing two theories that could explain why does feelings could be an obstacle in helping us in making the right decision. So number one, we have ethical subjectivism. And number two, we have emotivism. So the first one that we're going to talk about is ethical subjectivism. So in ethical subjectivism, it is a theory about the nature of moral judgment. So um, it's in this theory, it's said to be that ethical subjectivism or um, moral judgments of people is innate within us. And it is the nature of our society. And ethical subjectivism is moral truths or ordinary facts about the world. Since nature na ng society natin, yung different moral judgment, is parang nagiging ordinaryong fact na lang ito when it comes to the world or when it comes to the society. So, ethical subjectivism is moral judgment simply describe our personal feelings. So, yan din that could explain it. And in ethical subjectivism, it's not just about yung things na maganda or what are the things that are good and are the things that are bad. Um, Also, ethical subjectivism, hindi nito sinasabi sa atin, no, how are we going to live? Do we need to conform with the society's rules and regulation, moral standards, ganyan. Instead, it is the nature of moral judgment. Sabi ko nga kanina. And it admits that moral judgment are the truth bearers. Ibig sabihin, yung mga moral judgment ng tao, yun yung magiging katotohanan. So in ethical subjectivism, it allows us to think for ourselves because it implies that we need not to agree with the culture or a society. So yan yung one of the positive side or positive note of subjectivism. Regardless of your own perspective, it will allow you to think what do you want to think, what do you want, or what would be your standards as part of a society. And it suggests that we are to identify our moral principles by simply following our feelings. Ayan. So in ethical subjectivism, the more we follow our feelings, the more na we will know what is our ethical principle. But on the other hand, the negative or the disadvantage for ethical subjectivism is that it has a weak foundation with some topics like slavery, racism, and discrimination. Siyempre, um, the positive note is that it allows us not to agree with what society or culture dictates to us. But sometimes, on some points, 'di ba, it has a problem. Siyempre, um, when it comes to these three topics, it may be negative or it is a negative thing in every society, no? And it has a large impact in a person's life. So, if we use yung ating emotions, kasi since sabi ni ethical subjectivism is, sundin lang natin yung emotions natin, malalaman na natin yung ethical principle na meron tayo. So, if sinunod natin yun, um, slavery, racism, and discrimination could be put aside. Or, there would be a perspective sa lalong-lalo na sa ibang tao na this tree has a good or good impact for other people. So, hindi nila mapapansin kung ano yung negative side no isang problem. And ang isa pang disadvantage doon is that these things will be good if gusto natin to. Like for example, gusto natin ng pang-aalipin sa ibang tao, magiging okay lang siya, magiging tama na siya because sinunod lang natin yung ating mga feelings. So next one, it also has a dangerous implication in the moral education. So I have discussed last time yung 6 stages ng moral development. So how one develop moral character or moral principle throughout the time. 'Di ba? So, doon, hinuhubog yung ating moral principle ever since bata pa tayo. But through ethical subjectivism, kapag ito yung umiiral lang sa isang society, it could lead to a dangerous implication in moral education. Which means, yung mga tao, simula man lang pagkabata, would be taught that they need to simply follow what are their likes and what are their dislikes. So with that, using or expressing feelings as a part of an issue, um, pwedeng maging negative yung um, judgment natin when it comes to moral decision making. Kasi, it may provide us deficient guide or insufficient guide na we need to develop yung proper feelings natin when it comes to certain things. And hindi na tayo magiging sensitive in different topics kapag ganito yung naging point of view na ating society. And in this theory, it tells us na, syempre, we simply follow our personal feelings and emotions. So, what would you do or what would happen if you simply follow your feelings and your emotions? You may have a different perspective with other people so as pwede din na maging or maging mali yung iyong decision on that certain point. So next one, we have emotivism. So in emotivism, wait lang. Moral judgment are not statements of facts but are mere expressions of the emotions of the speakers, especially they are feelings based. So same, halos the same sila ng ethical subjectivism. Pero malalaman nyo mamaya kung ano yung kanilang pinagkaiba. So yan. It pay close attention to the way in which people use language and acknowledges that a moral judgment expresses the attitude that a person takes on a particular issue. So for example, we need to know or we need to understand first how a person views or how a person use and understand a certain language or words. Like for example, syempre ang language natin at ang words ng tao is nagva-vary siya. Nagva-vary siya per culture. So, ibig sabihin nag-iiba-iba yung meaning ng different words, nag-iba-iba yung different pronunciations niya, so on and so forth. Like for example, Marcos was a president of of the Philippines. So if you're not aware with the Philippine history, you will not know who Marcos is. You will not be aware that Marcos is a president. And for another example, Jose Rizal is the author of Noli Me Tangere. So if you didn't know who Rizal is and you're not a particular reader of the Philippine history, you won't know Rizal and you will not have an idea what Noli Me Tangere is. And in this case, we are saying that there are certain points that it's either true or false. Meaning to say, pwede siyang maging true sa mga tao na merong alam doon, and it may be false if they didn't know what those types of informations is. So, in emotivism, it provides morality with insufficient explanations. Kasi nga, we use our feelings with this part. So, meaning to say, in emotivism, there are some non-fact stating sentences. Meaning to say, hindi sila nagko-convey ng information. And kapag hindi nag-convey ng isang information or reason yung isang tao is there would be an insufficient explanation. So meaning to say, hindi magiging sapat kung ano ba at bakit ba yun yung naging rason mo kung bakit mo pinili yung ganong type of decision. Next, suggests that in ethical disputes, we cannot appeal reason but only to emotion. So meaning to say, we can only use emotion. We cannot explain why or we cannot explain our side. But we can only use our emotion. Kasi nga, wala na si reason. And with that, it also fails to distinguish moral judgment from mere expression of personal preferences. Since we only use emotion and we're not using reason when it comes to emotivism, um, ang mangyayari nun is we will not have the ability to distinguish ano nga ba yung totoong moral judgment dun sa personal preference lang ng isang tao. And kasi, since there are insufficient explanation, we are denying the moral truths and moral knowledge to other people. And it somewhat dilutes the morality instead na helping to grow it or parang mas mag-grow doon. And also, in emotivism, since we're only using our emotion and not knowing what would be the reason is, so pagdating sa mga ethical disputes, is we won't be hearing the other person's sides. Bakit nila ginawa yun? So as it could also lead to propaganda wars since hindi nagja-jive or hindi nagkakaroon ng pagkakasundo when it comes to the parties involved. Since nga hindi nila pinapakinggan yung reason ng isa't isa. And also, emotivism, it would be against our basic knowledge. Paano siya naging against sa ating basic knowledge? Siyempre, instead na makinig tayo dun sa isang person, why does he use or why does he did this type of action, is mag-judge na tayo agad. Meaning to say, we tend to judge agad yung person without knowing his reason. So, instead na mas maayos pa yung problema or yung isang decision, is mas lalo magiging magulo siya at mas lalo tayong mahihirapan na ma-resolve yung isang kaso. Ayan. And if somebody utters that a particular act is wrong and explains that it is because it does not happen to fit his taste, kasi syempre emotions lang yung pinapagana natin. So if you dislike this type of thing, we cannot count his claim as a legitimate judgment. Meaning to say, we only use our emotions. It could lead to not claiming na hindi legit yung ethical judgment na yan. So, summary, or to summarize, so in every person, we have the right or we have feelings and emotions. And emotions and feelings are involved in moral thinking. So as we should use our um, feelings or emotion into careful consideration. Na before we can decide or before we could decide in some things or in a problem or in a dilemma, we should know first what would be the reason, what are the other opinions or what are the other facts surrounding, and what would be the goal of this or what would be the goal kapag na-solve no yung isang problem na yon. Like for example din, 'di ba? Meron tayong kasabihan na huwag kang mangangako pag masaya ka at huwag kang magdedesisyon lalo na kapag galit ka. So meaning to say, let us not put our feelings into a moral decision or in decision making. Kailangan balance lang yung ating emotion when deciding into something. And to take this consideration, we ought to mesh with an emotional instinctive reaction that provides a motivation to help us act ethically and correct the injustices that we see in our society or in our environment. So, that would be the end of my presentation for today. Any questions regarding my discussion?
Wala po.